The decision to revoke Temporary Protected Status (TPS) for Venezuelans is one of the most controversial policies of the Trump administration. It doesn't just reveal the flaws in U.S. immigration law, it exposes the hypocrisy and cruelty behind a policy that's being sold as national security. But is it really about protecting America, or is it about political convenience? Thousands of Venezuelans, many of whom have been living in the U.S. for years, are now at risk of deportation to a country ravaged by dictatorship and violence. Their future hangs in the balance, and it's not just a matter of immigration paperwork, it's about human lives. This decision is more than just a policy, it's a moral failure.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you for your testimony. I want to say at the beginning that I think that in terms of roles in the cabinet, that coming into your job, I think you're the most qualified cabinet member. In a cabinet that I think has otherwise been incompetent and unqualified. You and I are obviously of different political parties, but we share kind of a similar story. My grandmother, Victoria Castro, came to this country when she was 6 or 7 years old as an orphan because both her parents had died after the Mexican Revolution, and the closest relatives that could take her in were not in Mexico. They were in San Antonio. And when my grandmother came to Eagle Pass, Texas, the manifest that allowed her to come, there was a question that was asked on that document. And the question said, purpose for visit. And her relatives that were bringing her, they wrote in to live, that she was coming to live. You have an incredible family story of your parents and your grandfather coming from Cuba in the 1950s and maybe early 1960s, and a similar background of helping you and your siblings pursue their American dreams, just like my grandmother did for my mom and for us. But I feel like today, under the Trump administration, our grandparents may have ended up in a gulag or banished or in Guantanamo, or like the girl that I visited with who was a U.S. citizen in Mexico a few weeks ago with a brain tumor, having her seizure medication seized at a CBP inland port. And her mom, who's undocumented Mexican, her caretaker, 24 hours a day, not allowed to come back with her to get treatment for her condition. And I want to ask you specifically about a policy decision where on February 5th, DHS Secretary Noem rescinded temporary protected status for Venezuelans. This same thing was used for 700,000 Cubans in the 1960s and 70s. And she stated that in consultation with the Department of State, assessed conditions in Venezuela and that there are, quote, notable improvements in several areas such as the economy, public health, and crime that allow for these nationals to be safely returned to their home countries. And you said as recently as a few years ago that returning and failing to renew TPS for Venezuelans would be, quote, very real death sentence for countless Venezuelans who have fled their country. That was a few years ago. And so I wanted to ask you, do you believe after everything that Maduro has done, and you and I have both condemned him, as I think almost everybody on this dais has, that TPS recipients forced to return to Venezuela will truly be safe in that country? And how do you justify the decision to send 350,000 people to Venezuela right now?
Well, 350,000 people have not been sent to Venezuela. I think you're referring to the TPS cancellation of the temporary status. So 2 points. Number one is, unfortunately, that blanket approval of TPS gave TPS, including to people that, frankly, we should not have allowed in this country, irrespective of what part of the world they came from. Number two is the hope that now people that have received TPS will apply through the asylum process. And I believe many of them, if not most of them, will have very credible asylum claims to make for the reason you've just outlined. I think that problematic is that when you do a blanket TPS, number one, it's supposed to be temporary. None of these TPSs ever go away. But number two, when you do a blanket, especially in a mass migration event, it is going to protect and cover people that, frankly, we should not have allowed into this country. The overwhelming
I mean, we're both part of the same Latino community. You're not saying that all 350,000 people were gang members, are you?
Of course not. The majority are not. But if 1,000 of them are, we got a big problem.
Well, yeah, but because there is a very small group who are criminals, just like any group of Americans, You're saying that none of them get any due process? They're just automatically expelled?
No,
Like
they
no
have a right
review,
to-
no nothing for any of their cases?
Well, again, it's not my department. We don't do asylum claims, but I
Well,
can
but
tell
she
you they
said
can
she
apply for
consulted with
asylum.
you. She said that it was her decision and your decision, and a few years ago you said it was a death sentence.
Yeah, but the problem is the previous administration did a terrible job of vetting applicants for TPS. They just blanket approved it.
They
So
did
now,
things that have been done in other administrations before.
but never in this
Republican and
mass migration
Democrat.
event. Look, the bottom line is, of course, the overwhelming majority of them are not gang members, and they will be able to apply for asylum, and they have a very credible claim.
I have
but
to
there
yield.
are some that are, and
I have
they
to
need to be
yield my
removed from our
remaining
country.
time. I got it. I got to yield my remaining time to.
Venezuelans fleeing a regime that has made life unbearable are now being forced back to a country where political persecution, torture, and death are everyday realities. The current administration claims these people will be safe if they return, but is that true? And why is the U.S. turning its back on them now, after offering sanctuary to others in similar situations just a few decades ago? Let's break this down, starting with the personal connections that make this issue so powerful. It's not just about policy, it's about people, families, and the American dream. The speaker begins by sharing a deeply personal story about their grandmother, who came to the U.S. as a young orphan after the Mexican Revolution. It's a story many of us can relate to, families coming to this country in search of a better life. The speaker talks about how their grandmother's arrival was marked by a simple question on an immigration document: purpose for visit. The answer? To live. She came to join relatives in San Antonio, escaping the turmoil in her home country. This story sets the tone for the discussion. Immigration isn't just about political debates, it's about families. It's about people who, like the speaker's grandmother, come to the U.S. to build a future, not to take advantage of the system, but to survive and thrive. Similarly, Secretary Castro shared his own family's immigrant story. His parents and grandfather fled Cuba in the 1950s and 1960s, searching for a better life. The shared experiences of these two families, separated by geography and time, reflect the same core values of hope, survival, and the desire for freedom. And for many Venezuelans today, it's the same story. Venezuelans seeking refuge in the U.S. are not different from those who came before them. They are not criminals. They are individuals and families seeking safety from one of the most brutal regimes in the world. They are fleeing oppression, violence, and a collapsing society. But instead of finding refuge, they are being told that their time in the U.S. is over. The real turning point came on February 5, when DHS Secretary Noem rescinded TPS for Venezuelans, claiming that the situation in Venezuela had improved, economically, in terms of public health, and in crime rates. But let's be clear, this is far from the reality on the ground. Venezuela remains a country in crisis. The political regime under Nicolás Maduro continues to oppress its people, denying them basic rights and freedoms. Castro dismantles the argument put forward by the Trump administration. He points out that the very policy of offering asylum to those fleeing tyranny is being reversed, with devastating consequences for Venezuelans. By ending TPS for these individuals, the administration is essentially sending them back to a country where they face persecution, imprisonment, and even death. The hypocrisy of the policy is glaring. The U.S. has long prided itself on being a sanctuary for those fleeing oppressive regimes. But now this administration is turning its back on the very people who need that sanctuary the most. It's a betrayal of the core values the country was built on. Now let's talk about the human impact of this policy. This isn't just a matter of paperwork or bureaucracy. It's about lives. Families who have spent years building a life in the U.S. are now facing deportation to a country where their safety is no longer guaranteed. The situation is dire for many of these individuals. Castro shared a gut-wrenching example of a U.S. citizen with a brain tumor, whose seizure medication was seized at a CBP inland port. Her mother, who was undocumented, was prevented from accompanying her daughter to get medical treatment. This isn't a one-off case. It's the reality for thousands of people who will be affected by the end of TPS. Imagine being forced to leave your home, your family, your job, and your life, only to be sent back to a country where every day is a struggle for survival. The decision to end TPS doesn't just rip families apart, it denies them the dignity of a safe life. It places them at the mercy of a collapsing regime that has shown no regard for human rights. Here's where the story takes a darker turn. The administration's decision to revoke TPS for Venezuelans isn't just a failure of policy, it's a glaring double standard. In the 1960s and 1970s, Cubans fleeing political persecution were welcomed with open arms. The U.S. government offered them sanctuary, recognizing that they were escaping a brutal dictatorship. But now, in the case of Venezuela, the administration is choosing political expediency over compassion. Castro called out this hypocrisy directly. How can the U.S. justify offering sanctuary to Cubans fleeing a dictatorship, but deny the same protection to Venezuelans who are facing a similar situation? The answer is simple: politics. The Trump administration's actions aren't motivated by a desire to protect national security, they are motivated by political optics. It's a convenient way to cater to a specific political base, while ignoring the very real human suffering happening in Venezuela. This isn't just a policy decision, it's a moral failure. The U.S. cannot claim to be a country that champions freedom and democracy, while simultaneously closing its doors to those fleeing tyranny. What makes this policy even worse is the lack of due process. Castro pointed out that the blanket approval of TPS by the previous administration was flawed, but that doesn't justify the current administration's actions. By revoking TPS without allowing for a proper review of each case, the government is bypassing justice and violating the basic rights of individuals. The current administration is treating entire groups of people as criminals based on the actions of a few. Rather than providing a fair and just process for individuals to plead their cases and apply for asylum, they are simply being kicked out with no due consideration for their unique situations. This is not how a just society operates. This isn't just a policy failure, it's a violation of the core principles of justice and human rights. In the midst of all this chaos, Castro stood firm in his defense of human rights. He didn't just attack the policy, he attacked the lack of compassion that underpins it. He reminded the nation that values like compassion, justice, and human dignity are more important than political convenience. For Castro, this isn't just about TPS, it's about standing up for the most vulnerable members of society. It's about protecting people who are fleeing oppression, regardless of their political beliefs or their nationality. This is about doing what's right, even when it's politically difficult. By calling out the hypocrisy and cruelty behind the decision to end TPS for Venezuelans, Castro took a stand for the very principles that make America great. He showed the world that we must never abandon our values, especially when lives are on the line. So what's the bottom line here? The revocation of TPS for Venezuelans isn't just a policy failure, it's a moral failure. It's a decision that puts the lives of thousands of innocent people in jeopardy, all for the sake of political convenience. This is not the America we should aspire to be. We cannot claim to be a nation that values human rights and democracy, while turning our backs on those who need protection the most. The situation in Venezuela is dire, and the U.S. has a responsibility to offer refuge, not punishment. As we look ahead, let's remember what this decision really represents: a failure of compassion, a failure of justice, and a failure to live up to the values that this country was built on. It's time for us to demand better. We must stand for truth, justice, and the protection of human rights, no matter the political cost. What do you think about this controversial decision? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. Our next one is sure to be even more eye-opening and controversial.